Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
This is Monsters is a true crime podcast and YouTube channel where I tell the stories of the worst people on the planet. Though the stories of the victims are told, we focus on the monster who carried out the evil act. The show is split into seasons, and each season has a theme. In Season 1, we covered cases of filicide, which is the act of a parent killing their own child. In Season 2, we covered cases of people killing for love. We recently finished up Season 3, where we covered cases of parricide, which is the act of someone killing their parents. Tune in now as we start Season 4, where we dive into the minds of family annihilators, sick individuals who decided to destroy their entire families. Check us out anywhere that you listen to podcasts or on YouTube by searching This is Monsters.
I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue our investigation into the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my peerless co-host, Alice.
You mean Peerless like the ship?
Is
Law
there a
joke?
ship that's peerless?
2 ships named Peerless. Come on. Oh, my goodness.
I think I missed that one. You
Wow.
remember, they only taught us law in half the cases.
Oh.
Was that a tort? Is that a tort case? Or
No,
contract
it's 2
case?
ships
What is that?
named Peerless, and they I can't. Wait. You really don't know what I'm talking about?
How is this relevant to law?
This
No, I
is like
don't
one of
know.
the first law cases you learn in
In what class?
law school. Contracts.
Law
I
school
wanna
is
say?
divided into classes. Which class?
Not at Yale. Truly not at Yale. This is actually the case. I think I learned contracts and torts on the playground.
Well, I didn't learn torts at all, so I took torts.
I'm not going to
but-
tell you what 2 ships named Peerless mean. I'm going to let our law listeners, our law students who are listening, write and tell you about the 2 ships named Peerless because I can't believe y'all didn't cover it.
I'm sure if they're having to do that in law school, they're really going to enjoy doing it again for the benefit of our
so
podcast,
basically,
but-
it's been like a decade since I read this case. But essentially, it's a contract case where there are 2 ships named Peerless, and I think one of them was supposed to deliver cotton to one of the Peerless ships and deliver to the wrong Peerless ship, but they refused to pay because it was the wrong Peerless ship, even though the contract just said to deliver to a ship named Peerless. Lawyers
I
are the
don't remember that
worst
one at
because
all.
anyone would know that's like clearly if you deliver to the wrong ship.
I remember Hadley versus Baxendale with the
Is that the hairy hand?
mill. No, it's the one with the mill sends out its, I don't know, it's like whatever drives the mill because they need a new one and they don't get it to them in time, so they lose a bunch of money and then they sue. Yeah.
Do you
I
think
don't
we
know.
are like kings and queens of delaying right now because we don't want to? We know we're getting to the meaty part of JonBenét. We can't get there.
I see. I just think this is the kind of relationship we have with our fans. We're just chatting. We're just here talking about true crime and the law. And so right now we're talking about the law. We're about to talk about true crime.
Yeah, I think they're only our friends because we talk true crime, though.
Well, that's true. That's true. There's definitely been a little bit more introductory chatter with JonBenét than maybe some of the other cases. But since you are so eager to jump in the case, you don't want to talk to me anymore, then I guess we can get back into it.
I just think this is getting so exciting. We are at 10:40 a.m. the day after Christmas.
We are at 10:40 a.m. the day after Christmas, the day that JonBenét Ramsey was discovered missing, and we're about to come to a very important part in this case, and really the point where if the police hadn't messed it up before, the case is about to be irrevocably ruined forever, probably, unfortunately. So we got to about 10:40 a.m. yesterday. Remember, the ransom call was supposed to come in between 8 and 10. It did not come in, and so the police, in their infinite wisdom, have left all but one officer, have left the house. Linda Arndt is the only officer left who is there to deal with everyone who's in the house. So really, we're going to talk about what happened, and there's rumors about what happened, but there aren't that many witnesses. So this is one of the reasons that this critical period of time, it's a little unclear exactly what all is going on, and we'll start with 1040. According to some accounts that you will read, this is the point where John Ramsey leaves the house to pick up the mail. This is something people have pointed to as unusual. Why would he leave the house? Why does he need to pick up the mail? Is that really something to be concerned about when your daughter's missing? But it seems like this story, which is repeated often, is actually false. The mail for the Ramseys' house wasn't delivered to a mailbox. It was delivered through a slot. So it is true that Ramsey got the mail after it was delivered through the slot, but he has a very good reason for that. He wanted to see whether there was anything else related to the kidnapping, another note, some other kind of communication, anything that would help them get to the bottom of this. And that story has morphed into an example of Ramsey going about his business despite the fact his daughter is missing. This idea about the mail and that John left to get the mail almost certainly originated with Linda Arndt's initial report. In that report, she says that John left to get the mail. But importantly, she says she wasn't there when he supposedly did this, but just surmised that he had gone out to get the mail because she saw him opening it later. And this should trouble you because the police officers' reports, particularly their initial reports, are really important for us to know what all was going on, the facts of that day. Those are the things that people are going to come back to again and again. And you see that happen here. People read the report, which is what we always tell people to do. Go back to the initial sources, read the reports. If you read the report, you think John Ramsey left that day to go get the mail. He didn't do that. And this is just a small example of the problem that plagues this case with a lot of false information that leads people to think one thing or the other. Around 10:45, representatives from the FBI have arrived at the Boulder Police Department. As many of you know, the FBI actually has primary jurisdiction over child kidnapping cases that originates with the Lindbergh kidnapping and legislation that was passed after that. Essentially, kidnappings often cross state lines. Time is of the essence, and so the decision was made to give the FBI primary jurisdiction, which is unusual. It is unusual for federal agencies to have primary jurisdiction over what you think of as more of a local crime. So the FBI, generally speaking, doesn't investigate murders, for instance. If there's a murder committed in your town, it's going to be investigated by your local police, not the FBI. If there's a kidnapping in your town, the FBI is going to be involved. Now, as we've said before, the FBI is involved in all sorts of cases because local jurisdictions can invite them in, and if they have the resources and the interest in working that case, then they can help out there. But this being a kidnapping, the FBI is automatically going to be involved. And that brings us to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a critical moment in this case. So Linda Arndt is, she's the only police officer there. She's trying to keep everybody occupied. She's trying to keep everybody from messing up the scene. Patsy Ramsey is almost inconsolable. John is sort of pacing around the room. And at some point, Linda Arndt takes Fleet White aside. Fleet White, who is one of the best friends of this family, one of the first people that the family called, and says, hey, I want you to do something to occupy John's mind. It's obvious he's agitated. It's obvious that he's upset. So why don't you take him to once again look through the house, do a top-to-bottom search to see if anything is amiss. So,
by the way, that's exactly what a victim advocate is for, to deal with these situations, not a layperson. Right? A victim advocate is trained to deal with situations of trauma, of shock, and how best to help the, victim's family while not impeding an investigation. And so this
which,
is,
of course, they've already left.
Exactly. They've already left. But that's the role of the victim's advocate.
The victim's advocates basically showed up, messed up the scene, and then left before they could do anything that might actually be helpful. Alice, before we continue, I am so excited that The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive. What's one thing you'd purchase with a little extra savings? A weighted blanket? Smart speaker? That new self-care trend you keep hearing about? Well, Progressive wants to make sure you're getting what you want by helping you save money on car insurance.
Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts when they sign up. Discounts like having multiple vehicles on your policy. Progressive offers outstanding coverage and award-winning claims service. Day or night, they have customer support 24/7, 365 days a year. When you need them most, they're at their best.
A little off your rate each month goes a long way. Get a quote today at Progressive.com and see why 4 out of 5 new auto customers recommend Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary, discounts vary, and are not available in all states and situations.
Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. greenlight.com/Wondery.
This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy. I'm cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and t-shirts that give back. One purchased equals one donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
So, because of this instruction from Detective Arndt, John Ramsey, led by Fleet White, went down to the basement where they first went to the train room. This is at least the 3rd time the basement has been searched. And they examined that broken window that they noticed earlier. And at that time, John said that he broke that window a few months ago. They searched for glass on the floor, and then they went to look at a broom closet, and then to the wine cellar where John Ramsey found JonBenét Ramsey. At around that same time, at 1 o'clock, Heather Cox answered the phone and was told by someone unknown to bring Burke Ramsey back to the Ramsey home.
And I can only imagine this is because the police were thinking, we really need to talk to Burke, and he's off with, the Fernie's kids or whatever, so let's get him back to the home so we can talk to him.
Yeah, again, very bizarre that they didn't talk to him before Burke left, because there were supposedly only 3 people in the house and a potential intruder when JonBenét disappeared. So he kind of is an important witness. Now at 1:04 p.m., JonBenét Ramsey's body is found. And from Newsweek we know, quote, Mr. Ramsey entered the room first, turned on the light, and upon discovery of JonBenét's dead body, he exclaimed, "Oh my God, my baby." The time is listed as 1:05 in the Ramsey's account. Newsweek further reports that John Ramsey later states, quote, "All I could do was scream to try to attract attention." Remember that this door was approached, this wine cellar door was bolted from the outside, approached by the first officer that arrived on the scene, but he didn't open the door. The door was then opened by Fleet White when he searched, but he couldn't find the light. But when John opens the door, assuming it's his house and he knows where the light is, he immediately turns on the light, and that's when he sees JonBenét's body.
Yeah, we're going to spend more time on the finding of her body later on when we get through the timeline, because that's another one of those things that people spend a lot of time on and a lot of focus on. So we will talk about that more.
Now let's talk about what JonBenét looked like when she was found. She had black duct tape covering her mouth. A cord was wrapped around her neck that was attached to a wooden garrote, and her hands were bound over her head in front of her. She was covered with a light-colored blanket. John Ramsey ripped the duct tape off JonBenét's mouth and attempted to untie her hands, completely contaminating her body for any sort of DNA that may be there. His DNA is now mixed in there. This is, again, why hopefully it's not lay people finding a body.
Yeah, this is why if you're the police, you don't send them off to look for it either. I mean, that's the thing, It's just, I don't know. The compounding of errors is just one after another. If you just had 1 or 2 or 3, who knows? But it just seems like everything they do, every step they take is a misstep on this day. And this is just the latest one and probably the most important one. Like you said, the entire body has now been compromised. The scene of the crime has been compromised. And it's only going to get worse, as you could expect. I mean, look. Assuming John Ramsey didn't have anything to do with killing his daughter, it's hard to blame him for this. This is the kind of reaction you would expect from someone just finding their daughter's body in this circumstance. And once again, he doesn't necessarily know that she's dead. And she's been dead a while, and as we're going to see, rigor mortis has set in and all that stuff. But as we've said before, family members, you don't find the body of a loved one unless it's in really bad shape, and even if it is, and assume that that person is dead. Your first assumption is always going to be either they are still alive or I need to try and save them. And so this notion that there was anything about JonBenét that would have prevented her father from reacting this way, I think is silly. That's not to say that he didn't react this way because he was intentionally ruining the scene. Maybe he was. But the fact that he reacted this way, to me, doesn't really tell us anything about his involvement or not involvement in the case. Now, everything gets crazy now, as you can imagine. So Fleet White's running up the stairs. He's calling for an ambulance. This is around 1:05. He's yelling. He's screaming. He's grabbing the telephone. He's losing his mind. Everybody else is hearing this ruckus go on. At the same time, John, as Alice said, he's ripping the duct tape off of JonBenét's mouth, and he grabs her body and he rushes up the stairs with her. He eventually sets her down on the floor. For reasons that are unclear, at some point, Linda Arndt actually picks up the body again and moves it again So now it's in the living room. It's near the Christmas tree. John's bending over her, repeating over and over again, "My angel, my little angel." Patsy, who is in the other room, and this is another one of those things that people put stock into, that Patsy did not immediately rush into the room, that she basically had to be led, really kind of stumbling into this room. Patsy knows what she's going to find when she walks in that room. Not necessarily because she did it, but because everything that's happening is telling her what has been found. Her daughter's dead. And the notion that it's unusual that she would react the way she did, knowing that when she walks in that room, she's going to see her dead daughter, to me, is not that crazy. But in any event, her friends who are with her sort of help her into the room. She sees JonBenét, and she essentially throws herself on top of JonBenét's body, also crying out, which, once again, just as a human being, I fully understand why this stuff would be going on. But as someone who would like to solve the crime, this is just awful. I mean, we are doing everything we can at this point to destroy any evidence that might be left on this body.
And it's not just the lay people destroying the evidence. The detective should never have touched that body either. If it was already touched, cordon it off. Get the parents out of there. There's nothing they can do to save her at this point, and they can only damage the body and the crime scene and any sort of evidence there. As harsh as that may sound, the purpose of that is in hopes that you can preserve evidence so that you can solve this heinous crime.
And it's hard to be too critical of Arndt because she's been put in this terrible situation where she's the only officer there. Nobody in the Boulder Police Department had a lot of experience, but certainly Arndt didn't have enough experience to deal with this insane situation that's now swirling around her. Now, something really weird happens at this point. At least Arndt will say many years later that something weird happened in this moment. So Patsy's on top of JonBenét. Arndt is sort of down near JonBenét's body. John Ramsey is also on his knees next to JonBenét's body. And at this point, Arndt will later say that John looks up and looks into Arndt's eyes. So they're sort of looking at each other over JonBenét's body. And Arndt says that in that moment, she mentally counted the bullets in her gun because she wasn't sure that everyone would leave the room alive, which has to be one of the weirdest things a police officer has ever said about a scene that they were at.
And also, honestly, really unprofessional because there's no facts within this. It's completely subjective and it's not clear. It leaves a lot to be imagined by the listener. I don't know about you, Brett, but if I just found my baby murdered, I would probably have murder in my eyes too. And it may not be directed at anybody in particular. It may be directed at everybody, right? And so it's not even clear what this testimony means. They may have locked eyes, and John may have looked like he wanted to murder someone because he may have wanted to murder someone. And it may have just been that he happened to lock eyes with the person closest to him. And that's why when law enforcement officers testify, they usually stick with the facts. Their own emotions don't come into it. It's based on their experience and hard facts, right? So they can point to the fact that John reached for my gun. That's why I mentally counted the bullets in my gun. That would be based on evidence or based on some fact you could testify to. But to say something really subjective and to leave open interpretation to the listener is dangerous as law enforcement testimony.
The problem with this case, and we're going to see this again and again, and this is the first time it's happened, so good time to talk about it. Obviously, this case became the biggest case, maybe, of the century. Certainly one of the biggest cases, true crime cases in the history of the country. And all of these people who were involved had their moment of fame. They're all doing interviews, they're writing books, and what you will notice happens, like Linda Arndt didn't put that in her report. There's nothing in her report about looking at John and knowing that he was, there was murder in his eyes or whatever, and she's going to defend herself. This is all something she said later on. She has this weird relationship with the family we're going to talk about more, where she's really close to them to the point that, like Steve Thomas, who, as we've talked about, wrote the book for sort of the position of the Boulder police that the Ramseys were involved and believes that JonBenét's mother killed her, he is no friend of Linda Arndt in the book. I mean, he complains about her incessantly and how she would not talk to the police about some of the things Patsy was telling her. Patsy and Linda became really good friends, and Patsy would talk to her, and Arndt would not report back to the police what she was being told, which is not what you're supposed to do, obviously. And at some point, she gets removed from the case, and did she have a mental breakdown or not? Who knows? And then later on, she's telling this story about the bullets, and you just think, what in the world? And how can we trust anything this person says? And we see this a lot with so many players in this story, where when all this happened, there was one thing, and then as it became the biggest story ever, and we went back to these people 10 or 15 or 20 or now 25 years later, all of a sudden their story is much sexier and much more dramatic, and you just have to wonder how much of that is reality, and also just how hard does that make to ever find justice in this case. Just imagine if tomorrow they arrested somebody and said, this is the person who did it. They were an intruder. They murdered JonBenét. I mean, the defense counsel would have a field day with all of this stuff that's going on, right? I mean, the defense is just set up right there. And it's just one reason you don't investigate cases or try cases in the media, because you end up having stuff like this. So whether she was planning on shooting John or not, at this point, she calls for backup. She declares a code black, which is police lingo for murder, over the radio. Now you have all those police who left to go back to their Christmas vacations or Boxing Day or St. Stephen's Day or whatever they were doing. They're all rushing back to the house to try and deal with this. You got the forensic teams on the way. 2 officers, Ron Walker and Larry Mason, are on their way. They walk into this house. They see JonBenét's body in the living room. Everybody's surrounding her. Patsy's on her knees asking God to raise her daughter from the dead, like Lazarus was raised from the dead. And at this point, Mason finally decides, we got to secure this house, the entire house. Now, it is far too late, like the horses out of the barn or whatever the colloquialisms are to describe when you've done it way too late. Whatever you were supposed to do, this should have happened from the very beginning. By now, all the damage is done.
So about 10 minutes after Mason decides to secure the house, finally, John calls the pilot. Remember, he had placed a call that morning saying that they would not be taking off at the time they had anticipated. From reports, it's reported that 20 minutes later, after Arndt moves the body, John is overheard placing a phone call to his pilot to ready the plane to head for Atlanta. Police instruct them not to leave town, so they stay at a friend's home in Boulder. Whew, there's a lot there.
There's a lot there, yeah.
I mean, I have found in cases where someone's loved one is murdered or is dead, they are unwilling to leave the spot, completely irrationally, right? They don't want to leave the room. They don't want to leave the building. If it's the hospital, they don't want to leave the city. They can't do anything about it. Their loved one is dead, but they just don't want to leave. And to basically within like the hour decide to want to go across the country and not where you were originally planning to go is confusing to me in terms of my experience with how victims' families react.
Now, John will later say that at this point, his concern, JonBenet is dead, and John has an older daughter, Beth, who died several years before. The family, they have an affinity for Atlanta. It's in the South, which Patsy feels comfortable with. John likes Atlanta. His daughter is buried in Atlanta. JonBenet is going to be buried in Atlanta. He says his thought is, get Burke safe, get him out of Boulder. Whoever did this, get him as far away as possible. Get Patsy to Atlanta, where she has her support network. Boulder's not their, it's not, they live in Boulder. That's where the business is, but that's not necessarily where they want to be. And he wants to get his family away from this, get them safe, and get them somewhere where they have friends and family who can support them. That's essentially what he says now. Obviously, a lot of people have thought, this is a strange thing because it seems like you're fleeing. And one of the things you look for when you're looking at suspects in a crime, take the Delphi case, and you have two young girls who are murdered. You have no idea who it is. Well, one thing you look at are changes in behavior, one of which is leaving the area suddenly, because that is something murderers tend to do. They want to get away from their crime. And so, yeah, a lot of people have looked at this and thought, this is really suspicious of John.
And now, note that the police tell them not to leave town. This is actually very normal protocol. Anyone who's involved, who may have information, who may be a suspect, are told not to leave town because the police need to have easy access to talk to you. Maybe you can lead them to JonBenét's favorite place where you were yesterday, walk you through different things in your house. So for investigative purposes, it makes complete sense for the police to tell them not to leave town. At 1:45, the Ramseys leave their home and they go to the Fernies' home. Remember, that's where Burke had been all morning. And their friend, Mike Bynum, who is an attorney, advises Patsy and John to get attorneys.
Yeah, and this is another fateful moment because a lot of people have pointed to the fact that the Ramseys were very quick to hire lawyers. And the thought is, well, if you don't have anything to hide, why would you hire a lawyer? My advice to you is if you're ever in a situation like this, hire a lawyer. And that's exactly what Bynum is thinking. Bynum, he can think for himself. What he says is his friends, he's over at the Fernies, he meets with the Ramseys, he sees the Ramseys, they're completely devastated. Patsy can barely move. She can barely process anything. She's completely distraught. John is in between sobbing and lucidity, but not really that great. The police want to talk to them, which is expected. Their daughter is dead. This is going to be a murder investigation. Bynum very quickly realizes you need representation. You don't have your faculties right now. You're not thinking straight. You need somebody who can think for you. And John says, I can't handle this, take care of it. And so Bynum goes and hires the best lawyers in Denver to handle this case. And that has kind of haunted the Ramseys in some ways because they hired bulldogs. And those guys, their primary concern was protecting the Ramseys and ensuring that nothing bad happened to them, which led to a lot of friction between the police and the Ramseys that eventually would completely destroy the relationship, create this incredibly adversarial relationship, which probably was not helpful at all to figuring out who did this.
Yeah, this is really difficult because obviously as attorneys, we always tell people to get attorneys, but they are in a difficult position because they need to have a good relationship with the police for the sake of their daughter's case. And I don't know, Brett, we've been against bulldogs before. I'm not. Everyone has their own style, and they always tell you in law school, don't be the type of lawyer that you're not, right? So if you're a big personality storytelling lawyer, be that. If you're a bulldog, be that. But don't try to be a bulldog if you're actually a more understated type of lawyer. And I don't know what's most effective. I think it depends on the situation. That's partly what you have to learn with experience and age as an attorney is which side of your personality should dominate in what situation, right? It doesn't do anyone good if you're a bulldog and everyone's trying to work together, for example. But you're right. I think this sets the tone for the case for the Ramseys.
And I can't say how I'd react in this situation because I'm always very defensive of people for hiring lawyers. I have to say, if this were me, I probably would take if my wife went missing or something happened to one of my kids, I would probably take the position of give me the lie detector, question me all you want. I want you to eliminate me so you can move on. And that's probably what I would do. That's not necessarily the right thing to do. It's not necessarily the smart thing to do, particularly if the police have decided you did it. And we're going to talk about this more, but it didn't take long for the Boulder police to decide that the Ramseys were responsible for this. And, if the police believe that, then they're not asking your help to find the murderer. They're asking your help to convict you. And how much help should you give them? If if you're dealing with Scott Thomas 100% believes they did it. And it's so obvious he 100% believes it. If you read his book, he hates these people with a passion. Like, there is no objectivity when it comes to Thomas. Thomas really doesn't like them. And there is nothing they can say to him that's going to change his mind. And anything they say to him, he fits into his theory. So, if you're the Ramseys and you're faced with that, what are you going to do? Are you going to talk to that guy and try and convince him? Or are you going to listen to your lawyers who say, look, that guy's trying to put you in jail for a crime you didn't commit, which, by the way, means your daughter will never find justice because you didn't do it. And it's a really difficult situation. And I think this focus on the fact that they hired lawyers is a little misplaced. Now, I will admit, if you listen to Thomas's book, read some of the other accounts, there are times where you will scream at the page, just go talk to the police, because it does feel like the Ramseys are about as obstinate as they can be. Now, that's not what they'll tell you. They'll tell you all the times they cooperated and they gave all these samples of hair and DNA and all this other stuff. But what the police really wanted from them was what they got in like the Darlie Routier case, where very soon after the murders, they talked to both the husband and the wife separately and get their story. Because once you have that, you can decide whether or not their story fits the facts. Are there discrepancies, inconsistencies? Does it seem rehearsed, et cetera, et cetera? And maybe if that had happened, this whole thing would have gone differently. Maybe Thomas wouldn't have thought that they did it if they had that conversation. But they didn't, and the interview with the police did not happen until well into this investigation. And famously, they were on CNN talking to, I forget who did the interview, but they were giving an interview to the media about the murder before they had talked to the police about the murder.
That's not ideal. Brett, before we move on, I am so excited to talk about our sponsor, PDS Debt. How many of you wish there was a better solution to paying off your debt? Our sponsor, PDS Debt, has customized 0% interest options for anyone struggling with credit cards, personal loans, medical bills, collections, or any other type of debt. Because of the tough year from COVID-19, certain types of debt can now be reduced and in some cases completely eliminated from your credit. There are more options now than ever before to take control of your debt, and the experts at PDS Debt can help. PDS Debt is offering our listeners a free debt analysis and copy of their credit report just for completing the 30-second online debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/prosecute. You will receive a full breakdown of all the interest you shouldn't be paying each month and multiple options on how they can help get rid of it.
Alice, PDS Debt is one of our oldest and best sponsors, and we love these guys because of what they can do for our listeners. If you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances aren't going down, this program is for you. The average American with credit card or personal loan debt over $5,000 ends up paying back 2.5 times what they originally spent. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low 0% interest monthly payment. Everyone with over $5,000 in debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. Bad, fair credit, whatever you've got, it's accepted. Save thousands in interest and fees, and you can pay off your debt in a fraction of the time.
PDS Debt is offering free credit reports to our listeners just for completing the quick and easy debt assessment at www.pdsdebt.com/prosecute. That's pdsdebt.com/prosecute. Take back your financial freedom today by visiting pdsdebt.com/prosecute. Let's go back to that day. So around that same time, around 2:30 p.m., Burke is finally interviewed by the Boulder Police Department. He specifically spoke with Detective Patterson at the White's home, and Burke reportedly said that he, quote, slept through the events of the previous night. I would just note that there's another time where he purported to be asleep, but said that he wasn't asleep, and that was the morning that JonBenét was discovered missing. Remember, he said that he just pretended to be asleep in his bed. So, I'm not saying he's necessarily lying. a 9-year-old boy, I would be terrified if I heard someone in the house in the middle of the night, whether I were a child or not. But he has said already once that day that he pretended to be asleep because he was afraid.
Yeah, that's true. And, he's been pretty consistent over the years with his statements that he slept through the night, then all the ruckus started, he woke up, he then pretended to be asleep. But it is a good point. He said he was asleep before, and you could imagine if he did hear something and didn't act, and now his sister's dead. I mean, the guilt there could be significant. It's another reason to block it out or choose not to believe it. We're going to talk more about Burke a lot. Burke is a popular topic when it comes to the Ramsey case. One thing that's worth noting, he talked to the police several times. And the Ramseys talked to the police too. It's not as if they didn't talk to them. They did talk to them. It's just the sit-down interviews, the formal interviews that you might prefer. Well, that you definitely prefer. It didn't happen for a while. Burke talked to the police a couple times. This time when he talked to the police, I think this was actually without the Ramseys' permission, which is a no-no, but whatever. He would later talk to a psychologist about this. The Boulder Police Department's position on Burke is that he is a complete non-entity in this case. He doesn't know anything. He's telling the truth when he says he slept through everything, and basically he's a red herring to the extent people want to focus on him at all. Now, who knows whether the Boulder Police know what they're talking about or not. Obviously, they are a controversial group of investigators, and you can already see they have not clothed themselves in glory up to this point in this case. So,
absolutely. Now, later that night, around sometime between 7:25 and 7:40 p.m., John Ramsey takes a walk with John Fernie and another friend, Dr. Buff. And during that time, understandably, if your child just died, you don't have all your faculties about you. John says repeatedly, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," while sobbing.
Which, of course, people have claimed is a confession. He's confessing that he did it. He's saying he's sorry. So that means he's sorry for murdering her. And that's obviously the only thing he could mean by these statements, which is absurd.
I mean, oftentimes we see the loved ones take blame when something bad happens, especially, this is understandable. A dad or a parent in general may think that they should be protecting their children, which I think all parents really feel that way. And here, it's the ultimate failure of a parent.
Yeah. And if you talk to people whose children have been murdered, they're wrong, but many of them will say, I failed my child. It was my job to keep them safe. It was my job to protect them, and I couldn't protect them. Even when they didn't do anything wrong. You'll hear people saying that. I mean, I remember when I was like 4, my cat. I had a cat when I was 4. It's the only cat I've ever had, but I lived out in the middle of nowhere, but not enough of the middle of nowhere that there weren't, cars going up and down the road. It's kind of like Pet Cemetery, if you've ever seen that. You got you're in the middle of nowhere, but the roads you're on, there are cars flying up and down it. Anyways, my cat got ran over by a truck, and that was very sad. It was a very devastating moment for 4-year-old Brett, and I can remember to this day crying and talking to my cat, Spirit, I guess, my dead cat, then saying how sorry I was that I had let this happen to this cat. And I feel like this is a very natural reaction to losing someone, and it is completely insignificant in the grand scheme of whether or not these people were involved in their daughter's murder.
Brett, that's such a heartbreaking story of 4-year-old Brett, but I think it illustrates, you're completely right. Saying I'm sorry is not construed, and we do not use it as a confession. I'm sorry in conjunction with I did it, sure, but alone I'm sorry, I'm so sorry could mean so many things. You're sorry about the situation, you're sorry to your daughter, you're just sorry this happened. Could all be possibilities, but that standing alone is not a confession.
And I feel like in so many of these cases, we're all looking for the Matlock moment, the smoking gun, and usually the things people point to that people think are really significant, I just don't think they are. And I've pointed that out in a lot of cases we've talked about where things happen that people will go to over and over again, and I'm just like, so what? I don't see why that's a big deal. And this is one of those instances. I do not see why this is a big deal at all. I mean, maybe John killed his daughter and is saying he's sorry. It's possible, I guess, but, and if you can prove that he did it, then okay, I'll consider that as a possibility. But the fact that he did it doesn't prove anything. That's the problem. We need proof that he did it before we can interpret these random things that happen when somebody's under the immense stress of their daughter being killed. And we talked about this so many times, this attempt by people to determine based on behavior or speech what somebody did or didn't do. And I just think there's behavioral analysis that the FBI does, which is based in science. It is not rock solid science. It's, I think John Douglas and everybody else would agree it's more of an art than a science, but it is valuable. But then there are these other things people do, like speech analysis or language analysis and sort of the behavior analysis, not overarching behavior, but like, the way you looked when you answered a question or whether you scratched your face or stuff like that, which I think is complete bunk. I just don't think it tells you anything because people do act differently under stressful situations. So to me, this just doesn't tell me anything. So at 8 o'clock, which I'll note is 7 hours after JonBenét's body is found, Dr. John Mayer, who is the pathologist, arrives on the scene. I have no idea why it took him so long. I mean, I guess the reason probably is it's the day after Christmas, but the fact that it took him a while actually is a problem. We're never able to accurately describe the time of death. Now, you are never able to accurately describe the time of death unless someone sees someone die. This is another thing that is more of an art than a science. But certainly the earlier that the pathologist finds the body, the more accurate their description of the time of death will be. So we just don't have a very good time of death in this case. Here's what the pathologist wrote in his report. Initially viewed the body in the living room of the house. The decedent was lying on her back on the floor, covered by a blanket and a Colorado Avalanche sweatshirt. What in the world? Can we stop again? Okay.
Whose blankets and whose sweatshirt is this? And was someone wearing it and they put it on her and now there's DNA and all fibers all over her? This completely contaminates the forensic integrity of her body.
Yeah, I mean, this is insane. So basically, just to rewind for you, John finds the body. He picks up the body. He carries the body upstairs. He lays the body on the ground. Linda Arndt then picks up the body, moves it closer to the Christmas tree for reasons that aren't entirely clear. Patsy then throws herself on top of the body. There's 8 people in the room at the time. And then somebody covers the body in a sheet. And somebody else decides that we also need to add this Colorado Avalanche sweatshirt. I mean, oh my goodness. There's not a lot you can say about this. It should be obvious to everyone just how insane this is, but that's what happened. So no point in dwelling on it, I guess. He goes on. On removing these 2 items from the top of the body, the decedent was found to be lying on her back with her arms extended up over her head. The head was turned to the right. A brief examination of the body disclosed a ligature around the neck and a ligature around the right wrist. Also noted was a small area of abrasion or contusion below the right ear on the lateral aspect of the right cheek. A prominent dried abrasion was present on the lower left neck. So basically, the body is still essentially in the same state it was found when John found her, at least in the same position. On the back, arms over the head. You've got this abrasion on her neck, which we're going to talk about because many people have tried to determine what that was. It was not present on her neck before she was killed. It was on her neck after she was killed. So some people think it was caused by something during the crime, and what it is that caused it has been a source of a lot of controversy. And if we knew what caused it, it would tell us a lot about the case. But in any event, that is what the pathologist finds. So it's 10:25. Patsy gets up and asks where her husband was. He's gone off on his walk. And where her son was. She's sobbing and saying over and over again, why did they do this? Why did they do this? She asked for a Valium, which she was given, and then went to sleep. By 10:45 p.m., JonBenét's body has been removed from the house, and my understanding is the Ramseys never stepped foot in that house again after they left it that day. Now, at the time, as we said before, what did the pathologist see? He saw a ligature wrapped around JonBenét's neck. His assumption would have been that she was strangled to death, and she may have been, but a more detailed analysis revealed this massive skull fracture that we've talked about before, a skull fracture which you could not see from the outside, but would have killed her even if she weren't strangled. The police revealed that on January 4th, 1997.
It's really interesting that it's very interesting that the pathologist cannot see this fracture or has not noted any sort of head trauma except for, I think an abrasion. An abrasion is not a skull fracture, which tells you what it looked like from the outside, right? We can see the picture of her skull fractured now, but I think that's very interesting that the expert, when viewing her without an x-ray, can't see this fracture or even note that there was some sort of head trauma.
And I would be really interested, if there's anybody out there, the one thing we're always missing is a doctor. And obviously, all the famous people have talked about this case, but you can't trust anything they say about this case because they're all paid by somebody. That's the problem. Everybody wants to say, well, Henry Lee said this, or Dr. Spitz said this, or whatever his name is, said this. Well, okay. Well, they're completely worthless because they were all being paid by somebody to reach whatever conclusion they reached. I haven't really heard a good sort of just independent person talk about this. And I would like to know, we talked about head wounds before. Just think back to the Kathleen Peterson murder, Michael Peterson, the staircase case. And we talked about the blood and how much blood there is from head wounds. Obviously, there's no blood here. There's just no blood. And what kind of trauma would cause that, I guess, is my question. Like, is there, in the literature, is there a specific kind of blow that is more likely to cause intense damage to the skull without breaking the skin, without causing a lot of bleeding? Now, one possibility is that the reason there's no bleeding is because JonBenét was being strangled and was almost dead from strangulation whenever this happened. Her heart was barely beating. Her blood was barely flowing. Then the strike happens, and maybe, there would have been bleeding if she had not been in that state. This is a thing people argue about. What happened first? Did the strangling happen first? Or did the blow to the head happen first? And we don't have a good answer to that. Obviously, if we did, it would tell us a lot. And really, what people think happened first determines who they think is responsible for this. The people who are in the camp that think John did this typically think that JonBenét was strangled first, that this was some sort of weird sex game gone wrong, that she was strangled first and then struck. The people who think that Patsy did it think that she was struck by Patsy in a fit of rage, and then Patsy, to cover it up, did the garrote, did the strangulation to make it look like some sort of sexual assault gone wrong. Then obviously, if you believe in the intruder theory, who knows? But it's very important which one happened first if you think one of the parents is involved. So I don't know the answer to that question, but if you're out there and you're somebody who knows this kind of stuff, please do reach out to us. I'd love to hear your expertise on that. So we said earlier it took a while for there to be a formal interview with the Ramseys. As we've said before, you want to have these interviews as soon as possible, when information is fresh, before people have had time to concoct a story, to get their story straight, to make sure that they don't have any loose ends to tie up. In cases we've talked about before, whether it's Amy Bechtel disappearing, or like I said, the Darlie Routier case, or the Dr. Jeffrey McDonald case. In each of those cases, the police were able to get interviews very quickly. In both Jeffrey McDonald's case and in the Darlie Routier case, while both of them were still in the hospital from their supposed wounds that they had suffered during the attack, the police are already getting that story, so they'll have a basis to work from that point forward. The police conduct their first formal interviews with John and Patsy Ramsey on April 30th, 1997, which is a full 4 months after the murder was committed.
And some of you may be thinking, why did the police wait so long? Well, here's the thing. Without a court order, John and Patsy, a subpoena, they don't have to talk to anyone, right? They would have to be ordered into court to speak. And so this interview had to be consensual. They had to consent to come and speak. And if they've hired an attorney who told them not to speak, you can see why there's been such a delay. So, I mean, the police don't have enough to charge. Otherwise, they would have charged. And really what they're interested in is finding out what happened to JonBenét. And usually it's very helpful to talk to the people who are in the house and the parents of the murder victim, if they're a child. So unfortunately, if John and Patsy were told not to talk to the police, it might be protecting them in some sense, but it certainly hurt JonBenét's case.
Yeah, and the fact that they wouldn't talk to the police was the initial problem that led to a lot of the mistrust with the Boulder police. So if you've read Thomas's book, you know this was his big thing. Why won't they talk to us? You know, if they got nothing to hide, they should be talking to us. And once they wouldn't talk to him, he decided pretty much that they were guilty, which only made it worse, right? At one point you have this, you know, Thomas says one thing, the Ramseys say another, which was essentially Thomas and the other police at the Boulder Police Department did not want to release the body to the Ramseys until they talked to them. And the DA and the police chief were like, we're not ransoming her body in exchange for them talking to us. Whether that happened or not, I mean, that discussion definitely happened. that Thomas wanted to talk to him, the police wanted to talk to him. The people interpreted this as being them ransoming the body in exchange for you talking to us, we'll give you your daughter's body so you can bury her. That's how people interpreted it, particularly in the Ramsey camp, whether it's true or not. And Thomas disputes it. He's like, oh, we were never ransoming the body. That wasn't what we were saying. Well, that's what they heard. And from that point forward, the Ramseys and their lawyers were basically like, I don't know what's wrong with you people, but you don't seem like you're on our side. And so in order to talk to them, they had all these preconditions they had to meet, including things like, we want to know the topics you're going to ask. We want to know ahead of time what you're going to ask, and all these requirements for this sit-down conversation. And these negotiations took a really long time. And so they didn't talk to him until April 30th. Now, here's the thing about that. Guilty, innocent, anything in between, that's a problem because their memory's not going to be as good 4 months later as it would have been 4 days later. And we lost information because of that. Whether they did it or not, whether they're innocent or not, we lost information because of it. There is no question about that. So it's a problem, and it's just more of the dysfunction of this case. And by the way, as we're going to talk about later, it's not just between the Ramseys and the police. The DA and the police hate each other with a passion. And so the police are constantly asking for things, and the DA's like, no, we're not going to give you that. The police wanted to do things as simple as subpoena the Ramseys' bank statements and their phone records, which is like investigation 101. You barely have to be a suspect to get that. And the DA would never let them do it because they were like, no, you can't do that. So the dysfunction in this case is so deep. It starts at the very beginning, from the moment JonBenét was reported missing, and it seems like every day there are new mistakes and new problems for an already difficult and complex investigation. So the police have made their mind up well before they talk to the Ramseys that they're probably involved. By December 1997, a year after JonBenét's death, the police are describing John and Patsy Ramsey as being under a, quote, umbrella of suspicion, which is it's a pretty stark thing to say about the parents of the victim.
And also a great way to alienate them and not have them participate in the investigation.
which, shocker of shockers, in January 1998, the Ramseys declined to participate in a second interview that the Boulder police have asked for, saying, now they're kind of turning the tables on them, that they won't talk to them unless the police will allow them to review the evidence in the case. And Thomas and his people are adamant that these people who are their top suspects can't review the evidence. You know, they want to see all the police reports. They want to see the police reports on their first interview. And they're like, no, we're not going to let you do that. You have to come to us instead. At some point, there's a grand jury that's impaneled in this case that hears evidence in this case. We're going to talk about that more later because it's really interesting what they do. But on October 13th, 1999, the district attorney, Alex Hunter, who is basically public enemy number one for the Boulder Police Department. Thomas's book is insane. Like, the police department are trying to run a sting on Hunter and catch him doing some illegal things so they can remove him from office. The police chief's getting no confidence votes from the detectives because he's too close to Hunter, and the police chief ends up getting fired. I mean, it is insanity. It's madness what's going on in the police department at the time. So Hunter comes out and says there's not going to be any indictments. There's no evidence that the Ramseys are involved. And that, of course, just infuriates the Boulder police more, which we'll talk about in more detail as we go through this case. December 2003, new DNA has been collected and submitted to the FBI database in the hope of finding new leads. As we've talked about before, DNA it's not a very old science. It's a very new science, and every day we're developing new techniques both for recovering DNA and for testing DNA. And I think people have a hard time with that sometimes, really understanding that. So, you know, sometimes you're finding new DNA or you're submitting DNA for the first time because maybe when you collected it, there wasn't enough to test. But as the technology has developed, we can actually test much smaller samples of DNA than we could before. In 2006, on June 24th, unfortunately, Patsy Ramsey, who's only 49 at the time, dies of ovarian cancer. At the time of JonBenét's death, she was in remission from cancer, which she had battled. In fact, it was a cancer which she had been told was terminal, and it was only through some really experimental treatments that she survived. But the cancer did come back, and Patsy did succumb to it eventually. Shortly after her death, one of the strangest things that happened in this case was a 41-year-old man named John Mark Carr is arrested in Bangkok, Thailand as a suspect in the case. Carr turns out to be a pedophile, and at some point he tells an American investigator that he drugged JonBenét and sexually assaulted her before accidentally killing her. He's flown back to the country, but prosecutors later dropped the case because those DNA tests can't connect him to the case. And then when they look deeper into him, they realize he has some real psychological problems. His story does not line up with the evidence in the case, which it's shocking that they had any holdback evidence in this case at all. Or maybe just he didn't follow it closely enough because so much of what we know is out in the public. But in any event, they're able to rule him out. He is not responsible for JonBenét's murder.
And again, we've talked about this. It may seem strange that someone would confess to a crime they didn't do, but JonBenét is probably the most famous case now and at this time. I mean, to this day, when I go to the grocery store, like, it is not uncommon to see JonBenét's face on some sort of tabloid magazine, right? New lead, what have you. We as a society are obsessed with this case, and people are obsessed with JonBenét and her beauty, and her youthfulness, and the tragedy of her dying so young. And so if you are a pedophile like John Mark Carr was, I can imagine that, you know, someone as famous as JonBenét would be like as you know, sick as this may sound, on the top of your celebrity list of people to take responsibility for. And that's what's happened here. Now, nothing really happens for about another 2 years. On July 9th, 2008, Boulder County District Attorney Mary Lacey says no one in the Ramsey family is considered a suspect and formally apologizes in a letter to John Ramsey. Now, remember, this comes after the police had said that the Ramseys remain under a, quote, an umbrella of suspicion. And they let that hang out there for 11 years, which is a very, very long time.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about this apology later, but it is another one of those sort of striking events in this case.
That means that there really don't seem to be any leads. In February of 2009, the Boulder Police Department resumes its status as the lead agency investigating the case. You can see this happen often, that the feds will pass it back to the locals when a case goes cold. They can't put any more resource on it, and they can pass it back to kind of the local police department. And so it's not a great sign when the local agency takes over. Not always the case, but I think it bears out here because really nothing happens in this case for more than a year. But October 2nd of 2010, police investigators conduct new rounds of interviews. But those don't seem to lead anywhere either. There are no press releases, there's no developments, there's no indictments brought against anyone for the death of JonBenét. Now, on January 27th, 2013, the Boulder Daily Camera reports that in 1999, the grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death. But Hunter decided there was not enough evidence to file charges and did not sign the indictment. That's a bombshell.
Yep. We're going to talk about that one a lot, too.
We'll just leave that there for now because we're reaching the end of our hour and we want to get through the timeline for you all. So put a pin in that. There's a lot. You're going to need a lot of pins to put in that one. Let's keep moving, though. December 28th of 2016. After CBS airs a docuseries about the case suggesting that JonBenét's brother Burke Ramsey may have been the culprit, Burke files a $250 million defamation lawsuit against CBS, the production company that made the documentary and one of the experts featured in the special, Dr. Werner Spitz. Burke had filed a separate defamation lawsuit against Spitz in October, stemming from a comment the doctor made during a radio interview. John Ramsey later files his own suit against CBS in Michigan State Court. The documentary itself is essentially a production of the book Foreign Faction by James Kohler.
And we've put the complaint in this case up on the website because it's actually really interesting to read. And you sort of get the Ramsey's recitation of the facts from the case, which are very similar to the facts in that federal court case we talked about on the first day of this investigation, which this is, $250 million. That's a lot of money. And if you've seen the documentary, the documentary is trash. Yeah, it is absolutely trash. It doesn't really matter. I'm not going to accuse anybody of killing anyone, unlike CBS, but the documentary is just so poorly done. I struggled to get through it. It was awful. We're going to talk about some of the ways in which it was awful later, but it was just so bad. It was really bad. Not even for the reason for the lawsuit. It was just so poorly done. And I was surprised that the people who took part in it because I would not have wanted to be involved in that production.
Yeah, and this is why we try to be careful about who we name as suspects because defamation is a real thing.
Yeah.
Let's wrap this up with January 2nd, 2019. Following an undisclosed settlement, Michigan Circuit Court Judge David Groner signs an order of dismissal in the defamation lawsuit filed by Burke against CBS. So they settle the case. We just don't know the details of it.
And Burke, it's funny if you look into Burke's history. Burke sues successfully so many people because people keep reciting these same facts that we'll talk about later, quote unquote facts that lead some people to believe he's involved. And the problem is if you're going to accuse somebody of murder, you better make sure your facts are all accurate, because if they're not, you open yourself up to a defamation claim. We've talked about this before. We talked about this in the Maura Murray case. If you assert something as fact, it's one thing to say your opinion. You can say, I think Burke did it, and that's my position. I think he did it. right? Well, okay, that's your opinion. You're allowed to do that. But if you say, I think Burke did it because here's a fact, and you say a fact that's not true, that's going to be a problem for you. And this, CBS essentially just regurgitated claims that had been made before about Burke, which had resulted in lawsuits before, which he had been successful in. He'd always gotten these people to settle because, a $250 million lawsuit, if you're going to lose, you better settle or you're going to be in trouble, even a company as big as CBS. So what CBS was thinking when they did this and why they did it, I don't know, but we're going to talk about some of the stuff in that documentary later. But if you've decided your view on this case based on the CBS documentary, I would just ask you to keep an open mind and reconsider it because there were a lot of problems with that documentary.
And let us point you to other better made documentaries.
Yeah, I mean, look, read if you want the position that the Ramseys are involved, read Thomas's book. It's a well-written book, and he was directly involved. Foreign Faction is not a well-written book. It's just not. And CBS basically made this documentary out of that book. And the guy who wrote that book had some involvement in the case, but not as much as Thomas did. And I would just advise you to read Thomas's book if you want to get that perspective. In any event, that's the end of the timeline, at least the timeline we're going to talk about. We've laid it out for you now. Sort of the sequence of events, but as you notice, there were things we mentioned that deserve more analysis, and that is what we're going to do over the next couple episodes. As we talk about things like the ransom note and the 911 call and the way the body was found and the cause of death and the statements by various people who are involved in this, the police reports from the day of. Is it possible that there could have been an intruder, or does all the evidence show that whoever killed JonBenét had to come from within that house? We're going to talk about all that. We're going to try and blow up some myths. We're going to try and explain some things that have been inexplicable. And we, like you, are going to look at evidence that is difficult to interpret, but is fascinating. And probably most fascinating of all is that ransom note. And that's what we're going to talk about next week when we join you again. We're 3 episodes into this. I'm sure you already have lots of questions and comments. Feel free to shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all your social media. If you're sick of ads, join us on Patreon. Hello to everybody who's watching on YouTube. Hope you guys are enjoying this. Hope you'll join us on Facebook at the gallery and discuss this case and others. Just want to say it's great to be on Podcast One. We're really enjoying being here. Thank you so much to them for taking us on. Well, Alice, before we sign off for tonight, do you have any other comments you want to make?
I'm really glad we got through the timeline. We've already started giving you a little flavor of what's to come, so come back and join us for discussions. But I don't know where this discussion is going to go. We don't talk about these cases ahead of time, so that we don't really know what the other one's thinking. So I look forward to see what you have to say.
I can't wait, Alice. I can't wait. Can't wait to hear what you have to say either. We always keep our conclusions to ourselves, so I am curious where you're going to end up on this. And it's kind of interesting because you notice we almost always agree. And we don't coordinate that beforehand. Like, I don't know. Just great minds think alike, I guess. I don't know what to say.
I guess so. Well, I will tell you this. We continue to read on this case, even as we're recording. So, Brett, after we finish recording tonight, I'm going to go back to some good summary judgment opinions and keep reading about this case.
There you go. Alice is always working. Okay, guys. Well, that's all we have for tonight. But we will see you again next week when we will continue to discuss this incredibly fascinating case. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Recording with you does not work.
Yes, it is.
the happiest thing I do.
You could be watching a
All
Christmas
day.
movie now. But look, now you're free to go watch all the Christmas movies you want, like
Oh, no.
for the rest of the year.
We're taking the kids to see Santa Claus tomorrow. So that'll be...
Oh, fun.
Yeah. Going to the woods and water or whatever.
Yeah. It looks magical online.
The hunting store. Yeah, Santa wears camo. It's awesome.
That's so cool. Visit Santa's Wonderland is what it says online. That's so cool.
There you go. That's what we're doing. We're visiting Santa's Wonderland tomorrow to see if either child wants to actually sit on Santa's lap.
It was like shy. It was like, I'm a little shy. This is brand new.
Maybe.
I think it's very
That first time was just a little awkward.
It was like, I don't really know you, but you're getting really close to me.
Yeah.
I know.
Who knows?
Like, I thought about this.